Recently, I have been thinking nonstop about the Swan Lake scene from A Woman Under the Influence. The one where Mabel steps out into the sun of the garden, hums Tchaikovsky's theme, and beats her wings. Why? The scene is small. That is, it is short. 20 seconds, barely a scene. But in my memories it can last for minutes, sometimes hours. Why? There is so much of it. I meant to say in it, not of it, but I think I'll keep it that way, since this is a film about a woman's excess, the crisis that is the so much, too much of her. If there's one quality that separates John Cassavetes' movies from almost everybody else's, Kent Jones once observed, it's the density of detail. There is so much of it. I have been thinking a lot about swans, specifically their relationship to sexual difference and desire, ever since I came across the story of Leda and the Swan. In the myth, Zeus, the king of the gods, disguises himself as a swan and either rapes or ravishes, depending on whom you speak to, the newlywed bride Leda. Later, Leda gives birth to a daughter, Helen, who is in turn either abducted or seduced, depending on whom you speak to, by the Trojan prince Paris. I was interested in these stories and their twofold telling. The discrepancy, that is, the degree of wrongdoing to which Zeus and Paris are held accountable, seemed to me to have less to do with the accommodation of male egos than it did the predicament of a woman's sexuality. That is, what happens to a woman when she comes face to face with desires not entirely her own? I don't mean to excuse sexual violence or dilute the pain it ripples through one's life, but at the same time, I think it's far from unusual for a woman to realize that her desires are so entangled in a complex web of expectation, overcompensation, fantasy, and self-defense that she cannot ascertain who it is she wants, or what, or how, and yet she wants. This sort of abundant but ungraspable erotic force underlies much of the conflict in A Woman Under the Influence, but it is seldom spoken about directly. The critics tend to focus on her mental health, not her sexual impropriety, or they chalk up her sexual impropriety to a failure of her mental health. But sexual desire is undeniably at play in the Swan Lake scene. Look at the way Mabel raises her brows, just slightly, as she steps outside, squints her eyes. She knows there is a man there, in the garden, watching her. When she spins around, humming, she performs for him, flirts even, summons erotic power as she moves her arms gracefully, calculatedly, up and down, holds up her ethereally beautiful face to the light, like a trinket. Then,
"Hey, would you dance with me?
She points her finger at him, then brings it to her upper lip, suggests a kiss. For a moment he seems to be seduced by her, contained by her bubble. He taps his foot, as if loosening. Then the puncture.
I'm worried about the kids.
Rejected. Worse than that, Mabel is left wondering, why did I desire him in the first place? The expression on her face suggests that she is genuinely befuddled by the question, as are we. At the beginning of the film, she met a man at a bar with whom she reluctantly entertained having an affair. Then he raped her at the bottom of the stairs. Could it be that she decided, thereafter, to anticipate a man's longing, to make it her own, so that she would not end up, again, defenseless at the bottom of the stairs? But now this man, he doesn't want her, and she is left with her own desire, which has no logic, no just cause, and so appears as a perversion. At the end of Swan Lake, the swan in question dies as a result of misplaced desire. She fell in love with a man who hunted her. He vowed to love her but married another instead. Faced with the choice between death and living as a swan forever, she decided, naturally, to die. When we watch Mabel dance, we realize that the swan is desire, the animal that croons and takes flight, then leaves one stranded, estranged from oneself, a fate worse than death, shadow of madness. The shadows cast by Mabel's hands are dark and many, writes Tracy Cox-Stanton on this same scene. The shadows disseminate through the past, conjuring other histories, other women, other bodies fixed in celluloid, oil, and emulsion. Among these are the female patients of La Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris, whose bodily convulsions were evidence of a condition 18th and 19th century doctors called hysteria. When Mabel beats her arms, curls her wrists, and staggers her fingers, she enters into communion with, or is perhaps possessed by, these women. Some were mad. Others were simply outcasts, pariahs, alcoholics, addicts, witches, whores, lesbians, and libertines. Women whose excess affronted men with their own lack, and so were punished accordingly. It is said that, once a day, these women were brought outside for a hint of fresh air, in chains. It's no wonder Mabel steps out into the air and moves her arms like that. Their ghosts rejoice. I swear you can almost hear them. Play the tape and close your eyes. There's Mabel's hum. Her footsteps on the grass. There's a brush. It doesn't sound like it could be coming from her clothes or the rustle of the ivy leaves behind her. There are other bodies there. Their gestures faint. They have accrued, ancestors and audience, for this moment, a subplot on the stage that is 1974. 1974, smack dab in the middle of women's lib, at which point a few thousand years of women's nose were reaching their crescendo, and at the same time becoming somewhat defanged. Such is the fate of a woman who dares to open her mouth. She runs the risk of losing her tongue, her teeth. The ghosts wait with bated breath. Mabel hums, her jaw clasped. Good. She smiles. Good girl. Then she speaks. How unfortunate.
Harold.
Insults a man's name.
Your first
How
name?
unfortunate indeed.
Harold.
And yet she continues to
Oh,
dance.
you poor thing. You can't name somebody Harold.
The man puckers his lips, shakes his head.
Hmm?
He says,
I'm worried about the kids.
it is a look every woman knows. The moment she slips from desired to degenerate, gleaming to grotesque. The ancestors dissipate. They scuttle back in time. Why? They fear for their own lives, as well as the dancers. In the blink of a cut, Mabel ceases to be resplendent ghost, the skin on the snowball of centuries of aberrant women, and returns to the material world, the world of relation. Her brow furrows. It is as if she is released from a spell. Duty hits her like a brick between the eyes. Where are the children? Have they eaten? Are they dressed? Furthermore, where am I? What have I done? When did my life become a maelstrom? In the world of the film, this scene, 16 seconds of it between an insult and a telephone call, is a relief. A needle of happiness in a haystack of abuse and bewilderment. Mabel smiles, spins. Her hair is golden. So is her face. Her eyes closed as if in prayer. Redemption? Apotheosis? I remember when I was a child, lying on the floor of my room and seeing a vision of heaven. There were no faces, just colors, swirling in a sunlit place, little glints like fish in light water, scintillations. That's how Mabel looks to me, with pink and blue balloons from the birthday party bobbing around her. They are slightly out of focus. She beams. Another memory. When I was a girl, I would sometimes press my feet down on hot asphalt or wet grass, and the inside of my skin would crawl with a message I called God. Later I discovered that this itch was symptomatic of, or at least approximate to, a word my parents said, mania, which was not, to my amazement, a message, but a disease that ran through the men in my family. Well, I was not a man in the family, but I later became one, and manic too, when I chopped my hair off and moved overseas. I don't mean to be nostalgic. I'm trying to ascertain the moment at which I realized that happiness can be dangerous, for a woman especially. It must have been around the time that I first watched a woman under the influence. That is, in high school, when the idea of a wayward woman seemed chic to me. I, who had grown up around well-mannered teachers, nurses, mothers, and housewives. In Mabel I found inspiration, kinship, but also warning. Misbehavior might be chic, but madness isn't, not when it gets you slapped in the face and sent away. There is a sort of low-humming dissatisfaction that one must cultivate in order to keep abreast of the world's continuum, its routine goings-on. The children need to be fed and dressed. The other parents need to be reassured that you will not always be barefoot. Your husband is on his way home. He is hungry, angry. You are neither child, nor angel, nor animal. You are a woman. You exist in relation. You owe it to these relations not to scratch that itch like a scab that will burst open and bleed everywhere. Except I want to capture Mabel in her one golden moment and keep her there. Liberate her from context. Untether her from the fabric of relations that enshroud her in shame. Let her beat. Let her beam. And so encase that old part of myself in amber. Retrieve it from the continuum. Its message dulled, but nevertheless discernible.